Hey, America, it's Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb riffing on Friday, right before the July 4th holiday, Independence Day, Friday, June 30th, 2023 at approximately 10 a.m. my time. Look, I don't know how else to tell you this, people. I um, I don't know what the disconnect is, but somehow, some way, some of you that I know are one in a thousand, maybe even one in a million, have got to find your way to the information that I am providing to you. Who am I? I'm an independent producer. I'm a muckraking journalist. I've been trying to drop truth bombs to you in America for over a year and a half, revealing the detailed information that I have that could turn the largest criminal racketeering enterprise in history upside down and inside out and right side up to basically rip control from the corrupt and give it back to we the people in uh, you know in the sort of amalgamation in the whole premise of liberty and justice for all predicated on the integrity of law. Okay, so what am I talking about for those of you who have never heard me? Well, you've got to look at everything that I've done out there. Do a little bit of homework. Try to figure some things out on your own. I know many of you are into conspiracy theory. Yeah, this is way beyond conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy fact to the tune of trillions and tens of trillions that have destroyed tens of millions of lives. It is the core tumor of everything. One of my go to lines is corruption births and fuels fascism. That's what's going on in our society. MAGA is this almost like literally, it's so incredible when you consider the last 20 years of zombie films, or maybe the last 30 years of, and 50 years, really, if you go back to fictional depictions from Orwell and Huxley and everything in between. But what we're living in is this reflection of this brain dead society that millions of people are getting behind a guy who is a bloviating fool, con artist, liar, who doesn't even make up half the stuff that he does. He reads from a teleprompter in a wag the dog sort of scenario in which he's one piece of the puzzle for the right wing billionaire establishment that is using this facade of some sort of revolutionary zeal against the deep state of which they're very much a part of. Who am I talking about? Well, in this particular case, in this apparatus, we're talking about the billionaires that have been on display left and right that are providing all sorts of tricks and special favors for Supreme Court justices. So the Supreme Court is corrupt, and that has been revealed pretty much with detail over the course of the last 2 years, but really the last 4 or 5 months in stark contrast. And of course, there's a lot of sort of impetus, if you will, from Senator Whitehouse of Connecticut as it relates to Judge Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. Okay, so that's one part of the equation. But to hide what exactly? Well, it's just chaos because if going back to the Koch brothers' investment and sort of control of what was then known as the Americans for Prosperity, the whole idea is to make government out to be the bad guy. But of course, they own government. That's what we're talking about. But the right wing billionaires are only one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of neutral, politically, sort of position billionaires that don't give a flying fuck about ideology or democracy or liberty and justice for all or the integrity of law because they've corrupted it beyond comprehension and they've gotten away with it for a very long time. So what have I done? I put together the nuts and bolts, which is probably the easiest to understand pathway to understand the racketeering enterprise that has basically blown up everything that the country is supposed to stand for. What is the country? What are the precepts? What are the principles? What are the actual nuts and bolts that actually create the scaffolding of which this whole system is supposed to operate? Well, obviously it starts with the Constitution that was born out of the Revolution, that was born out of the Bill of Rights, that creates these in order to form a more perfect union capacity with the ebbs and flows of the details of how Congress is supposed to operate to be able to create laws and maintain laws and to actually, use its institutions such as the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the CIA and everything else that's kind of deep state. And by the way, that was a bit of a faux pas for me to mention the CIA because that's another part of this thing. And I'm just riffing on a stream of consciousness that maybe I'll touch upon. But the bottom line is that we have institutions that get paid or budgeted north of let's call it $90 billion a year, $90 billion a year with 10,000 plus employees to do the work that I had to do on my own. that I was able to realize by asking the right questions, millions of dollars to have the opportunity to go find the right people to explore and expose and then present to the American people on a platinum platter are incredible work at www.thecon.tv, to which, to my knowledge, is only going to be available today for the final day. And then this revelation of the largest criminal conspiracy in history that never ended is going to be whitewashed from history. Why? Because there's no value in truth. But I know, of course, there is, but I just haven't broken through the machinery of the deception racket and the con artistry that's created tens of millions of tools in the full circus. And I know this is kind of like, I'm riffing and I'm making these these sort of like, I don't know, metaphors and everything else, and it's a little bit loosey-goosey, only because most of you have 47-second bandwidth scenarios and you don't understand that the system that we live in, the United States of America, that tens of millions of you have turned against through MAGA, because you're going to follow this guy that's telling you, Donald Trump, that the system, the deep state is corrupt, and you're going to blame it on Hunter's laptop and Burisma. Now, while that would be normally a shocking sort of scenario, in context to what Donald Trump is involved with his family, especially Saudi Arabia and Putin and everything else, is literally a drop in the bucket. But this is what's insane. As huge as everything Donald Trump is across the board, that has basically gotten the attention of the entire law enforcement agencies of the United States, is a tiny drop in the bucket compared to what I'm telling you. Tens of millions of people were destroyed. They were set up. Many of them, maybe some percentage of them, were idiots and deserved it to a degree because they were trying to play the system and they gamed the system and they got caught up in it and they got crushed like everybody else. But 99% of the people were unwilling participants in a system that they trusted, that had lost every ounce of integrity that it required to create a sound and safe the safety and soundness of our financial system, let alone our real estate market, that turned into a global racketeering enterprise that blew up the world. And then what happened was we provided illegally, and I'm the only guy in the country that's going to give you this information that can demonstrate soup to nuts the biggest racketeering enterprise in the history of the world that led to the Federal Reserve using the full faith and credit of the United States as the lender of last resort to provide tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity to save the bankrupt financial criminal system that I've just laid out to you. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I've got all of the answers. Corruption isn't some sort of amorphous sort of, you can't understand exactly what took place. No, you got to do the investigation, which of course I did miraculously to the tune of $4.5 million that the federal government has $90 billion a year to accomplish, but didn't, because that's how insane the criminality is. Because what we're talking about is they got away with $30 trillion in 2009, another $22 trillion in 2019, and tens of trillions since, not to mention quantitative easing. I think the ledger on this is $70 trillion plus since 2009 to maintain a system of an illusion based on the full faith and credit of the United States, which incidentally is tied back to our dependence on fossil fuel and the global reserve currency and our relationship with Saudi Arabia that was involved with 9/11 to a degree that nobody still understands to this day, even though it would be the easiest thing to prove in the history of our intelligence state, which is the deep state. It's all a mess, and it's all a fucking amalgamation of insane fraud and deception and betrayal and complicity and duplicity, mostly by the professional class. And it all preys upon ignorance. It all preys upon people not understanding how the thing works. And what we have in this society is we have this phenomenal wealth gap that everybody's aware of, but it seems to be a corollary to the knowledge gap. And what I'm filling in the blanks of is going to tell you exactly what the entire apparatus did. Now, you got to understand, I sacrificed everything. I sacrificed everything that mattered to me, my family, my future, everything, to be able to bring this truth to the American people. And why did I do that? Why would I take such a massive risk? Why would I lay it all on the line? For liberty and justice for all. That's why. Because dignity, decency, and integrity, and liberty and sustainability matter. The bottom line is, I'm trying to create a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. And so, to repeat myself, If you, me, and everyone you see that isn't a Nazi who believes in champions in dignity, in decency, integrity, and sustainability because of a system that works based on the law being supreme and no man or woman or business is above the law, which of course it is based on the corruption that I'm revealing to you, and corruption births and fuels fascism. Guys, it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. If we all do that, we will purge the misery of tyranny and we will usher in a clean new deal. I have got to create, and I'm going to, and it's somehow, some way, by God, there's got to be a miracle to domino to the millions of you, particularly on July 4th, Independence Day, because the entirety of what I'm doing is predicated on that moment. Why? Because ultimately, the original 13 colonies came together to do the miraculous, which was to purge the tyranny of King George III, the East India Trading Company, and the Redcoats from our shores to become independent, to create the separation of powers, and ultimately the Constitution, to where the rule of law is above tyranny. Get it? That's what we're celebrating on July 4th. And so what I am asking you to contribute to and invest and be a part of is an American revolution based on truth, justice, and liberty for all. The bottom line is I've got the answers that can turn the tables on all of this if only millions of you understood the ABCs of corruption and were willing to overwhelm the what? The MAGAs? The dumbest in our society that would follow a guy like Donald Trump, who's lied to us 5,000 times, whose every single thing he does is a corrupt business practice, who should have been thrown in jail long before he ever became the president of the United States, and you're going to sit on the sidelines and you're going to let those guys actually amass? Who's ready to fight back? I am. And I've already been doing it for 13 fucking years, incidentally. So the long and the short of it is, if you invest $13 into a campaign to purge corruption, think of it as a presidential campaign that's going to put all of the information in front of the American people in a barnstorming revival tour, which is a combination of exodus from the tyranny of corruption to the resurrection of the American dream, predicated on liberty and justice for all, built from a system of separation of the powers and integrity of law. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. And I need millions of you to come to the table now. There were tens of millions of you that got wiped out because of 2008 and so many more since. Pull your head out of your ass and understand that I'm asking you to help me save the day, because it's not about me. It's about you plus me equals we the people. If I can get 2,000 or roughly 1,300 people right away, we'll have enough money to build our podcast, to build a movement that is basically the great reckoning, unlike Russell Brand's cherry picking Hunter Biden's laptop, and that sort of thing. This isn't a great awakening. It's a great reckoning, because we have the answers. And if 1,300 of you champion this to begin with, we do this by the book, okay? I'm not a fucking con artist. I'm not, a vaudevillian act. I'm not a guy who's like, one of these snake oil salesmen. Yeah, look at my work, and you can see the difference if you understood what we have. I need millions to figure this out somehow, some way. So again, if you think that the system is rigged, it is. But there are details to how it is rigged, which I have revealed to you over and over and over. So those of you who realize that there is no way out of this, there is no presidential candidate who has yet been able to put all of this together. There are a few that are getting closer. There are a few that talk in hyperbole about this. In fact, I've been all over Elizabeth Warren on Twitter, calling her out for everything that she does is basically effectively platitudes, which are duplicity. She's not going to be able to end corruption. She has had 13 years of the bully pulpit to do it, and she never has, because she's duplicitous, because she was always a corporate attorney and then a professor at Harvard before she became a senator, and she plays the same game. She knows how to basically walk through the raindrops of power and basically say what people want to hear, which becomes a political manifestation of something, but that isn't going to challenge corruption. Guys, add it up. We had 9/11. We still don't know what the details of Saudi's role was and what that means for America and 20 years of war since. There's systemic prison predation in prison and our economy. And none of these problems are going to be fixed, especially the environment, if we don't purge corruption first. That is the key to the Clean New Deal, which is what I'm presenting. And to do so, there was over 50 million Americans that were directly impacted by the 2008 great financial crisis. There's over 100 million people worldwide. If I can get 13 million eventually, we would have a war chest to be able to create the party of non-corruption, to change, Citizens United, to change what's happening in the Supreme Court, to reveal what's happening in appellate courts and courts all over the country that allowed tens of millions of people to be foreclosed on illegally, which Osama bin Laden in his wildest dreams could never configure or imagine how to create as much disaster in the United States as our financial system did. That was then, of course, backstopped by the full faith and credit of the United States that allowed all of the people who destroyed everyone else, which is a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the population, to walk away with the loot, and they control everything, which again is tyranny. So on July 4th, as you're wading through everything and seeing the fireworks and seeing, the stars and stripes fly, and you feeling patriotic, you should feel ashamed of yourself for allowing what's happened, which is all a facade. I'm actually providing you the opportunity to join with me to carry the flag and then put it in the heart of deception and corruption to where we win the day. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards.